Rockville has always been a quiet town where everyone knew their neighbors, and the biggest news was when the local gas station changed hands. Located in rural Indiana, surrounded by endless cornfields and sparse woodlands, the town of 12,000 people lived a quiet life. Main Street stretched out with its typical Midwestern storefronts: Betty's Hair Salon, Mary's Pie House, a pharmacy, and a small supermarket. But the real heart of Rockville's economy was the medium-security correctional facility that stood on a hill 2 miles from downtown. Rockville Prison provided jobs for almost a third of the town's working population. Guards, medical staff, administrators, kitchen and laundry workers all climbed the winding road every morning to the gray concrete walls topped with barbed wire. Behind those walls were 820 inmates serving sentences ranging from 2 to 25 years. Nicholas Evans parked his dark blue Ford Explorer in the director's reserved spot at exactly 7 a.m., as he had done every workday for the past 8 years. At 48, he looked younger thanks to regular jogging and a fit physique, but the gray hair at his temples and deep wrinkles around his eyes betrayed the weight of responsibility he carried. 22 years in the prison system had taught him to read people at a glance, to distinguish sincerity from manipulation, weakness from feigned submission. "Good morning, Mr. Evans," greeted Dorothy Parker, his secretary of 30 years, whose immaculate hairstyle and strict suits made her look like a school principal. She had already laid out his morning reports on his desk and placed a cup of black coffee. No sugar, no milk, just the way he liked it. "Good morning, Dorothy. What's on the agenda today?" "The usual routine. Parole board at 10, meeting with the deputies at 1, and the Department of Corrections called. They want to conduct an unscheduled inspection next week." Nicholas frowned. Unscheduled inspections always meant trouble, even if there wasn't any. Do they know why? A complaint from one of the inmates' lawyers. Something about a violation of rights and inappropriate conditions of detention. "I see. Make sure all the reports are in order." Nicholas spent the first 2 hours of his workday reviewing documents and planning. Rockville Prison was renowned for its discipline and low incident rate, which was due not only to strict rules, but also to the fair, if unyielding, approach of its director. Evans believed in rehabilitation, but understood that order had to come first. At 9 in the morning, he set off on his daily tour of the facility, a ritual that allowed him to keep his finger on the pulse. The prison corridors were clean, the guards alert, and the inmates went about their business without any apparent tension. This was the result of years of work to create an atmosphere of strict but predictable fairness. In the medical wing, he stopped to talk to Dr. Robert Miller, the facility's chief medical officer. Miller had been working there for 15 years and had earned a reputation as a professional who could find common ground even with the most difficult patients. "How's it going, Robert?" Nicholas asked, peeking into the doctor's office. "Everything's under control. Seasonal colds, a couple of fights last week, but nothing serious. By the way, your wife is doing a great job. The inmates respect her, which is rare for a nurse here. Karen Evans started working in the prison infirmary 3 years ago when their youngest child started high school, and she decided to return to her profession. After a 10-year career break devoted to raising her children, the work was not easy for her, but she gradually found her place in the specific environment of a correctional facility. She said she liked her job," Nicholas replied, although Karen had become more withdrawn lately, and their conversations about work were kept to a minimum. The medical unit was located in a separate wing of the building and consisted of several offices, a small operating room, a ward for bedridden patients, and a pharmacy. The atmosphere here was as close as possible to that of a normal hospital, except for the bars on the windows and the constant presence of guards. Karen was doing her morning rounds, checking on the inmates who were taking regular medication. At 42, she had retained her attractiveness, although the fatigue of recent years had left its mark. Her chestnut hair, which she now wore shorter, framed her delicate features, and her hazel eyes, once sparkling with laughter, now often seemed absent, as if her thoughts were far away. "Good morning, Mrs. Evans," one of the inmates greeted her politely, and Nicholas noticed how even the most difficult clients in the infirmary treated her with respect. Nicholas and Karen's marriage was going through a rough patch. 18 years ago, they had married for love, full of plans and hopes. Karen was a young nurse at the city hospital, and Nicholas was an ambitious probation officer. They were united by shared values, a desire to help people and to build a strong family. The birth of their children, first their daughter Emma, then their son Jacob 3 years later, brought them joy and a sense of fulfillment. But as the years passed, romance gradually gave way to everyday concerns. Nicholas's career growth demanded more and more time and energy, and Karen, who had devoted herself to her children, began to feel isolated from the outside world. Their conversations increasingly revolved around practical matters: bills, the children's school problems, weekend plans. Physical and emotional intimacy became increasingly rare. Karen's return to work was supposed to remedy the situation, but instead, it added new problems. Working in a prison required a special disposition, and Karen often came home emotionally drained. Nicholas, who understood the nature of her work better than anyone, tried to support his wife, but his own busy schedule prevented him from giving her enough attention. Their children, 17-year-old Emma and 14-year-old Jacob, were preoccupied with their teenage problems and only occasionally noticed the growing alienation between their parents. Family dinners were mostly silent, with everyone lost in their own thoughts. During his morning rounds, Nicholas noticed Marcus Taylor among the inmates in the infirmary, a 35-year-old man serving an 8-year sentence for armed bank robbery. Taylor stood out from the other inmates not only because of his tall stature and athletic build, but also because of his special charisma. He knew how to win people over, whether they were fellow inmates, guards, or medical staff. "How are you feeling, Taylor?" Karen asked, checking his chart. "Thanks to your care, I'm fine, Mrs. Evans," he replied with a charming smile that did not escape Nicholas's attention. Marcus Taylor had been in prison for 4 years after a botched bank robbery in a neighboring county. According to the investigation, he had not acted alone, but his accomplices had never been found. During his arrest, he had not resisted and had behaved with a dignity that commanded respect even from the police. In prison, he quickly earned a reputation as someone who could be dealt with. He didn't cause any trouble, helped settle conflicts between inmates, and participated in educational programs. However, Nicholas, with his many years of experience, sensed something alarming about Taylor. He found it too easy to get along with people and win them over too quickly. These were signs of a natural manipulator, a man who knew how to read people and exploit their weaknesses to his advantage. Taylor's medical records contained nothing unusual, normal indicators for a man of his age, no chronic illnesses or special medical needs. He underwent regular mandatory examinations and never complained about his health. The only peculiarity was that he often visited the infirmary with minor problems: headaches, minor scratches, requests for vitamins. Dr. Miller considered this normal behavior for an inmate seeking to diversify the prison routine. After finishing his rounds, Nicholas returned to his office, where his daily administrative duties awaited him. Phone calls, meetings, reports, all the things that made up the work of a prison warden. But his thoughts kept returning to his wife and how their family life had changed. Nicholas arrived home at his usual time, 6:30. Their house on Elm Street was typical of the American middle class, a 2-story building with a small yard, a white fence, and a 2-car garage. Karen was already home and cooking dinner, and the children were doing their homework in their rooms. "How was your day?" Nicholas asked, kissing his wife on the cheek. "Fine, nothing special," she replied, without looking up from the stove. "Nothing special" had become Karen's standard answer to any question about her work. She used to talk enthusiastically about her patients and share her professional experiences, but now she seemed to have built a wall of silence around herself. At dinner, the family discussed their plans for the weekend, the children's school activities, and local news. The conversation was polite but superficial. Nicholas noticed that Karen was often distracted, as if her thoughts were elsewhere. After dinner, when the children had gone to their rooms, the couple sat down in the living room. Nicholas read the reports he had brought home, while Karen watched TV, but it was clear that she wasn't following the plot. "Karen, is everything okay?" Nicholas finally asked. "Yes, I'm just tired. The job is harder than I thought." "Do you want to talk about it?" "No, it's fine." I just need to get used to it. This conversation, like many others lately, ended with nothing. Karen went to bed earlier than usual, citing a headache, while Nicholas remained in the living room, thinking about what was happening to their marriage. He loved his wife. There was no doubt about that. But that love had become routine, devoid of the passion and intimacy that had once bound them together. They had become roommates, polite and caring, but emotionally distant from each other. It had been 3 months since Karen had begun to notice that her workdays had become less predictable, not because of medical emergencies or other crises, but because of one particular inmate who had a knack for showing up at the infirmary when she was alone. Marcus Taylor had a rare gift. He could make a person feel special with just a few words. There was genuine interest in his voice, and his dark eyes showed a level of understanding that Karen so desperately lacked at home. Their first conversations were innocent. He asked about her work, told stories from his life before prison, and shared philosophical musings about second chances and redemption. "You know, Mrs. Evans," he said one morning as Karen was taking his blood pressure because he had been complaining of headaches, "I've never met anyone who cares so sincerely about others. It's a rare quality these days." Karen felt her cheeks flush. She hadn't heard words like that at home in a very long time. Nicholas took her care for granted. Her children were preoccupied with their own problems, and here someone really saw and appreciated her efforts. "It's just my job," she replied, but her voice betrayed her excitement. "No, it's more than a job. It's a calling. You heal not only bodies but souls. I see how the inmates treat you. They trust you because they feel your sincere desire to help." Marcus could read people like an open book. Over the years of living on the edge of the law, he had learned to instantly identify the weaknesses of those around him and use them to his advantage. In Karen, he saw a woman suffering from loneliness in her marriage, craving recognition and understanding. She was the perfect target for his charm. Their conversations became more and more personal. Marcus told her about his childhood, about his single mother who worked 3 jobs to feed the family, about how he went astray trying to make a quick buck. His story sounded sincere, evoked sympathy, and made Karen see him not as a criminal, but as a man who had made a mistake. "I often think about how my life would have turned out if I had met a woman like you earlier," he confessed during one of his visits to the infirmary. "Maybe everything would have been different." Karen knew that such conversations were inappropriate, but she couldn't bring herself to stop them. For the first time in years, she felt desired, interesting, alive. At home, she was just a wife and mother doing her duties. Here, within the walls of the prison, she was a woman capable of inspiring admiration and interest. Dr. Miller began to notice that Karen was staying in the infirmary longer than usual. Several times he found her in deep conversation with Taylor, and each time she looked embarrassed, as if she had been caught doing something reprehensible. "Karen, is everything all right?" he asked one day when they were alone in his office. "Of course, Dr. Miller. What's bothering you?" "You've been spending a lot of time with Taylor. You know, he's known for being able to win over the staff. Be careful. He's just a lonely man who needs human contact, nothing more." Miller wanted to say more, but he knew that direct accusations would only push Karen away. Instead, he decided to watch the situation more closely. Meanwhile, relations in the Evans family continued to deteriorate. Nicholas, absorbed in his work and the upcoming inspection from the Department of Corrections, hardly noticed the changes in his wife's behavior. Karen became even more distant, often lost in thought at dinner, forgetting to answer her children's questions. "Mom, are you listening to me?" Emma asked one day, when Karen failed to respond to her story about the school play for the 3rd time. "I'm sorry, honey, I was thinking about work." "You're always thinking about work now," Jacob remarked. "At least you used to pretend to listen to us." Nicholas looked up from his documents. "Jake, don't be rude to your mother." "I'm not being rude, I'm telling the truth. She's been acting strange since she started working at the prison." Karen abruptly stood up from the table. "I'm going for a walk. I need some fresh air." She left the house, leaving her family in bewilderment. Nicholas wanted to follow her, but a phone call from his deputy distracted him. The next day, something happened in the infirmary that Karen had both feared and anticipated. Marcus asked her to stay after work, citing severe back pain. Dr. Miller had already left, and only the two of them and a guard in the hallway remained in the infirmary. "Where exactly does it hurt?" Karen asked, trying to maintain a professional tone. "Here," he pointed to his lower back. "I probably pulled something while working in the laundry room." Karen moved closer to examine the area. Marcus was standing close to her, and she could smell his cologne. Where did a prisoner get cologne? And feel the warmth of his body? As she bent down to feel his muscles, he whispered, "Karen, I have something important to tell you." Using her first name instead of her formal title felt like a boundary violation that both alarmed and excited her. "What?" she whispered. "I'm in love with you." The words hung in the air between them. Karen knew she should pull away immediately, call security, report the prisoner's unacceptable behavior. Instead, she froze, feeling her heart pound wildly in her chest. "Marcus, you can't say that. I know it's crazy. I know you're married, that there's a whole world between us. But I can't keep quiet. You're the only person who sees me as a man, not a criminal. The only one who treats me with understanding and warmth." His hand rested on hers. The touch was gentle, cautious, but it sent a shiver through Karen's body. "We can't. It's impossible." "I know, but feelings don't obey logic. You feel it too, don't you? This connection between us?" Karen couldn't deny it. What had been happening between them over the past few months had long since crossed the line of a professional relationship. She thought about him at home, looked forward to workdays, and found excuses to stay in the medical office longer. "It's wrong," she protested weakly. "It's wrong to live without love, without understanding, without intimacy. It's wrong to pretend that there's nothing between us." That evening, they just talked. Marcus told her about his feelings, about how she had changed his life in prison, how she had made him feel human again. Karen shared her loneliness in her marriage, her exhaustion from playing the role of the perfect wife and mother, her desire to just be a woman. When it was time to end their shift, they both knew they had crossed a line of no return. At home, Karen couldn't settle down. She mechanically performed her household duties and answered her family's questions, but her thoughts were elsewhere. For the first time in many years, she felt alive and desired, but at the same time, she understood the danger of the situation. Nicholas noticed her agitated state. "You seem agitated today. Did something happen at work?" "No, everything's fine. Just a hard day." She went to bed earlier than usual, but sleep would not come. Karen lay next to her husband, who was already asleep, thinking about the words she had heard from Marcus. No one had said such things to her in a very long time. Nicholas loved her, she had no doubt about that, but his love had become a habit, devoid of passion and romance. The next few days passed in a strange tension. Karen and Marcus tried to behave as usual in front of others, but every glance, every accidental touch was filled with new meaning. Dr. Miller definitely suspected something. He began to appear more often when they were talking. The turning point came a week later. Karen was lingering in the infirmary, sorting through medical records, when Marcus appeared complaining of insomnia. The guard, who knew him as a model prisoner, did not deem it necessary to accompany him to the office. "I couldn't sleep thinking about what I said to you," Marcus began. "Marcus, please." "No, listen to me. I know I'm asking the impossible, but if there's even the slightest chance that you feel something more than professional interest for me." Karen looked at him. This handsome, intelligent man who saw her as a woman, not just a wife and mother. In his eyes, she saw a desire that had been missing from her life. "I think about you," she admitted. "But it's crazy. The most beautiful things in life often seem crazy." He moved closer, and this time she didn't pull away. When their lips met, Karen felt the world around her disappear. The kiss was tender, full of restrained passion, and at the same time desperate, as if they both understood the impossibility of what was happening. They didn't notice the office door open and close again. Dr. Miller, who had come back for some forgotten documents, saw enough to realize that his worst fears had been confirmed. 2 months passed in a blur. Karen and Marcus met in the medical office whenever they had a chance to be alone. Their relationship quickly developed into physical intimacy, stolen kisses, hugs, and touches in the empty rooms of the medical center. Marcus was a tender and passionate lover. He told Karen exactly what she wanted to hear. making her feel young and desired. Karen was living a double life. At home, she remained a model wife and mother, although she was becoming increasingly distant. Nicholas attributed her behavior to stress from work and made no attempt to find out the real reason. The children also got used to their new mom, less attentive but also less demanding. At the medical center, however, Karen was a different person. She began to pay more attention to her appearance, bought new lingerie, and even changed her hairstyle. Her colleagues noticed the changes but attributed them to her desire to look attractive at work. Dr. Miller watched the events unfold with growing concern. After witnessing the kiss, he tried several times to talk to Karen, but she skillfully avoided serious conversations. Marcus, on the other hand, behaved impeccably in his presence, as if there was nothing between him and the nurse but a professional relationship. Marcus was a master manipulator. Over the years of living on the edge of the law, he had learned to use people without letting them realize they were being manipulated. Every word he spoke, every gesture he made, was carefully calculated to achieve a specific goal. Karen wasn't the first woman he had seduced for his own gain, but she was special. She was the wife of the man who controlled his life in prison. What Karen didn't know, and what Marcus was hiding, was his HIV status. He had learned of his diagnosis a year before going to prison, but he hadn't told anyone. This information was missing from the medical records he provided upon admission to the facility. He had managed to hide the test results by bribing one of the clinic staff. Marcus didn't just hide his illness. He deliberately used it as a weapon of revenge against the system that had imprisoned him. If he couldn't be free, then at least he could hurt those who kept him locked up. Infecting the prison warden's wife was his way of getting back at them. At the end of April, a mandatory medical examination of all staff was conducted at the prison. It was an annual procedure that included blood tests, fluorography, and a general examination. Karen, like all other employees, had to undergo a full examination. The test results came back a week later. Dr. Miller was reviewing them in his office when he came across a result that made him freeze. Karen Evans's blood test was positive for HIV. Miller reread the results several times, hoping for a laboratory error, but the numbers and letters remained unchanged. He immediately contacted the laboratory to confirm the accuracy of the test and received confirmation. Dr. Miller spent the next half hour in deep thought. As a doctor, he knew his duty was to inform the patient of the diagnosis immediately and begin treatment. As a human being, he understood the consequences this news would have for the Evans family, and as a witness to the relationship between Karen and Marcus, he began to suspect the source of the infection. He called Karen into his office under the pretext of discussing the test results. When she entered, her face was filled with anxiety. Doctors rarely call patients in to discuss normal results. "Sit down, Karen. We need to have a serious talk." "Is something wrong with the tests?" Miller paused, searching for the right words. "Your blood test came back positive for HIV." Karen turned pale, as if all the blood had drained from her body. "That's impossible. There must be a mistake. I checked the results twice. There's no mistake." "But how?" Karen couldn't finish her sentence. Her eyes were filled with horror and confusion. "Karen, I need to ask you something, and you need to be completely honest with me. Have you had unprotected sex in the last few months?" She was silent, but her expression was answer enough. Dr. Miller felt anger rising inside him. "Is it Marcus Taylor?" he asked bluntly. Karen burst into tears. All her secrets, her carefully constructed double life, had come crashing down in an instant. She nodded, unable to speak. "My God, Karen, do you realize what you've done?" "I didn't know. He didn't tell me." "Robert, what am I going to do now?" Dr. Miller stood up and began pacing the office. The professional part of his mind was already formulating a treatment plan, but the human part was furious at how easily an experienced manipulator had led a trusting woman astray. "First, we start antiretroviral therapy immediately. Second, I need to check Taylor's medical records. And third," he looked at her seriously, "you're going to have to tell your husband." "No, please, I can't." "Karen, you have to. Nicholas needs to be tested too, if you've continued to be intimate." "We've hardly slept together in the last few months," she admitted. "Nevertheless, he needs to know, and the sooner, the better." After Karen left, Dr. Miller requested Marcus's medical records. What he found confirmed his worst suspicions. There was no mention of HIV status in the records, but some of the entries raised questions. Marcus had regularly complained of symptoms that could indicate HIV infection, but always in a veiled manner. Miller decided to conduct an unscheduled test on Marcus. Formally, he could do so on medical grounds based on the inmate's complaints. The results came back the next day. Marcus Taylor was HIV positive, and the test showed that he had been infected for a long time. Dr. Miller realized that he was dealing not just with a romance between an employee and an inmate, but with deliberate infection. Meanwhile, Karen was torn between despair and hope. She couldn't believe that Marcus had deliberately infected her. During their last meeting, she had tried to talk to him about it. "Marcus, did you know?" she asked bluntly. "Knew what?" He remained impassive, but something dangerous flashed in his eyes. "About your diagnosis. Did you know you had HIV?" The mask of the charming lover instantly fell from his face. "Oh, I see. So Dr. Miller got to the bottom of it. You knew and you didn't tell me? What was I supposed to say? That I was dying of this damn disease while your husband kept me in a cage like an animal? You used me. We used each other, darling. You wanted to feel like a woman and I wanted revenge on the system. Fair trade." Karen realized that all these months, she had been a pawn in a game she didn't understand. All the words of love, all the tenderness and passion, it was all a carefully orchestrated revenge. That evening, Karen came home devastated. Nicholas immediately noticed her state. "What happened? You look terrible." "Nick, we need to talk. We need to talk seriously." They sent the children to their rooms and sat down in the living room. Karen knew that the next few minutes would destroy their family forever, but she had no choice. "There's something I have to tell you, and it will change everything." Nicholas felt something cold settle in his chest. "Go ahead. I'm having an affair. With a prisoner. With Marcus Taylor." Nicholas stared at his wife, unable to believe what he was hearing. "What did you say?" "And there's more. I'm HIV positive. He infected me and I think he did it on purpose." Nicholas's world collapsed in an instant. 22 years of professional experience had taught him to maintain his composure in any situation. But now, he felt a rage rising inside him that he had never experienced before. "You slept with a prisoner?" His voice was quiet, but it was so threatening that Karen recoiled. "Nick, in my prison? Right under my nose?" "I didn't mean for it to happen." "Nothing just happens," he exploded. "You deliberately betrayed me, our family, my job. He said he loved me. And you believed an inmate serving time for armed robbery? A 42-year-old woman believed the fairy tales of a criminal?" Karen cried, but Nicholas felt no sympathy for her. All he could think about was how Marcus Taylor had played with his wife, using her for his own revenge. "Where are the children?" he asked. "Upstairs, in their rooms." "Good, because now I'm going to tell you what I'm going to do to that bastard." There was something in Nicholas's eyes that frightened Karen more than the diagnosis, more than the revelation of her infidelity. It was the cold, calculating rage of a man who knew how the prison system worked and had the power to use that knowledge. The night after Karen's confession was the longest of Nicholas Evans's life. He didn't sleep a wink, lying in the guest bedroom and thinking about what had happened. His wife was asleep in their marital bed, but to him, she was now a stranger. 18 years of marriage, 2 children, shared plans and dreams. All of it had been destroyed in one evening. But what tormented him most was not the pain of betrayal, but rage. Rage at Marcus Taylor, who had used his wife as a tool for revenge. Rage at the system that had allowed this to happen. And rage at himself for not noticing what was happening right under his nose. By morning, Nicholas had made up his mind. Marcus Taylor had to pay for what he had done, but not through official channels, not through the courts, and not through disciplinary measures. Too many people would find out about the scandal, his career would be ruined, and his children would be branded with a mark of shame for the rest of their lives. No, justice had to be served in another way. Nicholas knew the prison system like the back of his hand. He knew where the blind spots of the surveillance cameras were, which areas were least patrolled, and how to get to any part of the building unnoticed. In 22 years on the job, he had studied every corridor, every room, every possibility. That morning, he came to work as usual, but his behavior had changed. His colleagues noticed that the director had become more abrupt in his communication and less patient with minor issues. Dorothy Parker tried several times to find out what was bothering him, but received only one-word answers. "Mr. Evans, you have a meeting with the department inspectors today," she reminded him. "Postpone it until tomorrow. Tell them I have urgent business." "But they're already on their way." "Dorothy, I said postpone it." The secretary recoiled from the unexpected outburst of anger. In all her years of working there, she had never seen her boss in such a state. Meanwhile, the atmosphere in the infirmary was tense. Karen hadn't come to work, claiming to be ill. Dr. Miller understood the real reason for her absence and was prepared for the situation to get out of hand. He decided he needed to talk to Nicholas, but when he tried to contact him, he was told that the director was busy. Marcus Taylor sensed a change in the atmosphere of the prison. Prisoners are particularly sensitive to changes in the mood of the administration, and he knew that something was going on. When he was brought to the infirmary as usual to receive the vitamins he regularly requested, Marcus noticed that Karen was missing. "Where's Mrs. Evans?" he asked the nurse who was filling in for her. "She's sick. I don't know when she'll be back." Marcus realized that his secret had been revealed. An experienced criminal, he sensed danger approaching. But in prison, there was nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. All he could do was wait and prepare for the consequences. Around 2 o'clock in the afternoon, Nicholas left his office and went on his rounds of the prison. But this time, his route was carefully planned. He knew that Marcus should be in the laundry room at that time. The prisoners worked there in shifts, and today it was Taylor's shift. The laundry room was located in the basement of the administrative building. It was one of the most isolated places in the prison, where the noise of the machines drowned out any other sounds. The surveillance camera in that section of the corridor had been broken for 2 weeks, and repairs had been postponed due to budget constraints. Nicholas went down to the basement under the pretext of an inspection. The guard on duty at the entrance to the laundry room stood at attention when he saw the director. "How's it going, Johnson?" "Everything's fine, sir. No problems." "Good. I want to talk to one of the inmates in private. Business. 15 minutes. "Of course, sir. Who exactly?" "Taylor. Send him to me in storage room number 3. The guard didn't ask any questions. The warden had the right to talk to any inmate at any time. A few minutes later, Marcus Taylor entered the small storeroom where Nicholas Evans was waiting for him. "Sit down," Nicholas ordered, pointing to the only chair in the room. Marcus sat down, studying the warden's face closely. He knew this conversation wasn't going to be about prison rules or work duties. "Do you know why I called you here?" Nicholas asked, locking the door behind him. "I think it's about your wife." "My wife?" Nicholas slowly turned to face him. "You infected my wife with a deadly disease, using her as a tool for your revenge, and you call her my wife?" "She made her choice. No one forced her." "Choice?" Nicholas felt anger rising within him. "What choice? You lied to her, manipulated her, hid your diagnosis. That's not a choice. That's deception and murder." "Murder?" Marcus smirked. "HIV isn't a death sentence these days, with the right treatment." "Shut up!" Nicholas exploded. "You deliberately infected my wife, destroyed my family, ruined my career, and now you sit here and make excuses? What are you going to do? Transfer me to solitary? Take away my privileges? I'm already in hell, Mr. Evans. You have nothing to threaten me with." "I can," Nicholas said quietly. A heavy wrench from the toolbox in the storeroom appeared in his hand. Marcus realized the danger and tried to stand up, but Nicholas was faster. The first blow landed on his head. Marcus fell from the chair but was still conscious. He tried to scream, but the second blow silenced him. Nicholas continued to beat him, putting all his rage, all the pain and humiliation of the last few days into every blow. When it was over, Marcus Taylor lay motionless in a pool of blood. Nicholas stood over him, breathing heavily, still clutching the bloody wrench in his hand. He had killed a man. The director of a correctional facility, the father of 2 children, a respected member of society, had killed an inmate in his own prison. but he felt no remorse, only satisfaction that justice had been served. For the next half hour, Nicholas methodically destroyed the evidence. He carefully wiped the wrench and put it back in the toolbox. He washed the blood off with water from the sink in the corner of the storeroom. He checked his clothes for stains. Fortunately, his dark suit hid the small splatters. The hardest part was coming up with a plausible version of what had happened. Nicholas dragged Marcus's body to a rack of heavy boxes and knocked several of them over. It had to look like an accident. The prisoner had tried to reach something on the top shelf. The rack had tipped over and crushed him. Satisfied that everything looked plausible, Nicholas left the storeroom and went up to his office. 20 minutes later, he came back down with security guard Johnson, pretending to make a routine inspection. "Where's Taylor?" he asked. "He should be in the storeroom, sir. You sent him there yourself." "I let him go half an hour ago. Go check." Johnson opened the storeroom door and saw the body under the overturned boxes. His scream attracted the attention of other employees. "My God, sir, there's been an accident!" Nicholas feigned shock and immediately ordered medical assistance and an investigator to be called. Dr. Miller arrived a few minutes later, but it was obvious that there was nothing he could do. "When did this happen?" the doctor asked. "I have no idea," Nicholas replied. "Johnson says he last saw him alive about an hour ago." Dr. Miller examined the body, and his face grew increasingly concerned. The nature of the injuries did not quite match the story about the overturned bookcase. There were too many blows to the head, and the injuries were too specific. But he didn't say anything yet. The official investigation was to be conducted by the police. Detective Linda Crawford arrived an hour later. An experienced investigator with 15 years on the job, she immediately took control of the situation. The scene was cordoned off, evidence was collected, and witnesses were interviewed. "Tell me what happened," she said to Nicholas. "As far as I understand, it was an accident. The inmate was working in the storeroom when a shelf collapsed and crushed him." "When was the last time you saw the deceased?" "This morning during my rounds. I didn't see him after that." Crawford carefully examined the scene. Something about it alarmed her, but she couldn't quite put her finger on it. "Mr. Evans, I'll need a complete list of everyone who had access to this part of the building today." "Of course. Dorothy will provide you with all the necessary information." When the body was taken away and the investigators had completed their initial examination, Nicholas returned to his office. He did what he thought was necessary. Justice had prevailed. Marcus Taylor would never infect anyone else, never destroy another family. But the hardest part was yet to come, avoiding exposure and living with the knowledge that he had become a murderer. The first 48 hours after the murder passed for Nicholas in a strange state between relief and anxiety. On the one hand, he felt that justice had prevailed. The man who had destroyed his family had gotten what he deserved. On the other hand, every phone call, every knock on the door made him flinch. Detective Crawford methodically gathered information. She interviewed all employees who had access to the basement on the day of the incident, studied surveillance camera footage, and analyzed the prisoners' work schedules. The accident theory seemed plausible, but her professional intuition told her that something was wrong. Dr. Miller couldn't get the oddities he noticed during the autopsy out of his head. Marcus's injuries were too extensive to have been caused by simply being crushed by a shelf. The multiple blows to the head and the specific nature of the fractures were more consistent with a beating than an accident. On the third day after the incident, Miller decided to share his doubts with the detective. He contacted Crawford and asked for a meeting. "Detective, I'd like to discuss the medical aspects of Taylor's death with you," he began when they met in his office. "I'm listening, doctor. The nature of the injuries doesn't fit the story of a tipped-over bookcase. There are too many blows, too specific a pattern of damage. It looks like the result of a deliberate beating." Crawford studied the photos from the scene carefully. "What can you say about a possible murder weapon?" "Judging by the nature of the fractures, a heavy blunt object was used, possibly a wrench or a hammer." "Was there a toolbox in the storage room?" "Yes, on the shelf. I saw it when I examined the scene." Crawford immediately arranged for the storage room to be searched again. Forensic scientists carefully examined each tool for traces of blood or DNA. Microscopic traces that could have belonged to the victim were found on one of the wrenches. But that was only part of the puzzle. They needed to establish who had the opportunity and motive to kill Marcus Taylor. "Doctor, what can you tell us about Director Evans's family situation?" Crawford asked. Miller hesitated. Disclosing medical information was a serious breach of confidentiality, but he understood that this was a murder investigation. "This is confidential information, but his wife recently learned of her HIV status. The source of the infection was Marcus Taylor." Crawford felt the pieces of the puzzle begin to fall into place. So Mr. Evans had a motive for murder? More than enough. His wife had an affair with an inmate and was deliberately infected with HIV. The detective realized that she now had all the elements of a crime: motive, opportunity, and a weapon. All that remained was to gather evidence. The next step was a more detailed analysis of the witness statements. Under further questioning, security guard Johnson recalled an important detail. The director had asked him to send Taylor to the storeroom for a business conversation, and then said he had let him go half an hour earlier. This version did not match the time the body was discovered. Crawford also drew attention to Nicholas's behavior on the day of the murder. Several employees noted that he was unusually irritable and nervous. Secretary Dorothy recounted how he canceled an important meeting without explanation. Surveillance camera footage showed that Nicholas went down to the basement twice, once alone and once with a security guard. About 40 minutes passed between these visits, enough time to commit the murder and hide the evidence. On the 5th day of the investigation, Crawford received the DNA analysis results from the wrench. The blood belonged to Marcus Taylor, and partial fingerprints were found on the handle, which required further investigation. Meanwhile, Nicholas tried to lead a normal life, but the stress was taking its toll. At home, the situation was disastrous. Karen was deeply depressed, and the children sensed tension between their parents, although they did not know the real reasons. Emma and Jacob noticed that their father had become more withdrawn and irritable. "Dad, what's going on?" Emma asked one evening. "Mom hardly ever leaves her room, and you're always nervous. Did we do something wrong?" "No, sweetheart. We're just going through a difficult period. Everything will be fine." But Nicholas knew that nothing would ever be the same again. Even if he managed to avoid being exposed, their family was broken. The trust between him and Karen was gone forever, and the secret they now shared would poison their relationship for the rest of their lives. On the 7th day of the investigation, Crawford received a key piece of evidence. Fingerprint analysis confirmed that Nicholas Evans's fingerprints were on the handle of the wrench. That was enough to get an arrest warrant. On the morning of the 8th day, Detective Crawford and 2 police officers arrived at Rockville Prison. Nicholas was in his office reviewing the morning reports when Dorothy announced the police visit. "Mr. Evans, can you come with us?" Crawford said politely as she entered the office. Nicholas looked up from his documents. In the detective's eyes, he saw what he had been afraid of all these days. "Is this an arrest? You have the right to remain silent. Anything you say can be used against you in court." Nicholas listened to the familiar words he had heard thousands of times in his career. Now they applied to him. "I understand my rights," he said calmly. "Can I get my jacket?" Silence fell over the prison building when the staff saw their director being led away in handcuffs. News of the arrest spread instantly throughout the facility. At the police station, Nicholas initially refused to make a statement. But when Crawford presented him with the evidence, fingerprints, witness statements, a medical report, he realized the game was up. "I want to make a deal," he said finally. "I'm listening. I admit that I am guilty of the murder of Marcus Taylor. In exchange, I want guarantees that information about my family's personal circumstances will not be made public." "Mr. Evans, you understand that you are admitting to first-degree murder?" "I understand, but I want to protect my children from unnecessary shame." Crawford studied his face. Sitting before her was a broken man who had killed out of revenge, but was still trying to protect his family. "Tell me what happened." Nicholas told her the whole story, from his wife's infidelity to the moment of the murder. He spoke calmly, without emotion, as if he were recounting someone else's life. The only time his voice faltered was when he talked about how he found out about Karen's diagnosis. "I didn't plan to kill him," he said at the end. "I just wanted to talk to him, explain what he had done. But when he started making excuses, when he said that my wife had made her choice, I couldn't control myself. The trial took place 4 months later. Nicholas pleaded guilty to second-degree murder as part of a plea bargain with the prosecution. The details of the motive for the crime remained confidential, as promised. Karen was present at the trial, pale and haggard. Antiretroviral therapy helped control the disease, but the psychological consequences of what had happened were much more severe than the physical ones. She felt guilty for Marcus's death and the destruction of her family. The children only learned part of the truth. They were told that their father had committed a crime while protecting his family, but the details were withheld. Emma and Jacob moved in with Karen's mother in a neighboring state, far away from the shame and gossip. The judge sentenced Nicholas to 15 years in prison with the possibility of parole after 10 years. In passing sentence, he noted the exceptional circumstances of the case, but emphasized that vigilante justice was unacceptable in a civilized society. "Mr. Evans," said the judge, "I understand your motives, but the law allows no exceptions. You chose the path of revenge instead of justice, and now you must take responsibility for your actions." Nicholas accepted the sentence without emotion. The irony of fate was that he had become a prisoner in the very system to which he had devoted his entire life. Dr. Miller remained working at the prison, but the memories of what had happened haunted him. He often thought about how he could have prevented the tragedy if he had paid more attention to the relationship between Karen and Marcus earlier. Karen sold her house in Rockville and moved to another city, where she found a job at a regular hospital. She took her medication regularly, saw a psychotherapist, and tried to build a new life. Once a month, she visited Nicholas in prison, not as his wife, but as someone who had shared his tragedy. Rockville Prison got a new warden, security measures were tightened, and additional rules for staff interaction with prisoners were introduced. The story of Nicholas Evans became a warning to all prison staff. Detective Crawford closed the case, but it remained one of the most difficult of her career. She understood Nicholas's motives and sympathized with his pain, but she knew that justice allowed for no exceptions. The town of Rockville slowly healed from the scandal. People whispered about the story, discussing what had driven a respected man to murder. Some condemned Nicholas, others understood him, but all agreed on one thing: the tragedy could have been prevented if people had been more attentive to each other. Emma and Jacob grew up, got an education, and started families of their own. They visited their father in prison, supported their mother, and tried to understand and forgive. The shadow of what happened would remain with them forever, but they learned to live with that burden. The Evans family's story is a reminder of how quickly a well-ordered life can collapse, how thin the line between law and revenge is, and how important it is not to let emotions get the better of reason. In the end, justice prevailed, but the price was too high for everyone involved in this tragedy.